I mean, reality is what we try to describe, and we do the best we can. Now, as far as why do electrons have the properties that they do, you think there's an answer to that. You think there's an answer to that. The reason why you think there's an answer is because you think somebody assigned properties to the electron, that somebody could have assigned different properties to the electron and made a decision to assign those properties that the electron has. And I'm saying there's no evidence for that. It's not necessary. Electrons have the properties they have. It is what it is. That's just the way it is. I don't think there's any other explanation. If something can't be different, there's no explanation for it. If it is what it is, and it couldn't be different, and we have no reason to think electrons could have different properties than what they have, then there's no explanation for it. In other words, explanation has a stopping point. And when you get down to what are the properties of these basic particles, that's where explanation stops.
Yeah, let me just quote a relevant part from the article regarding the reality and actuality. And it says that the real is the largest category. It is made up of powers, be they express or not. So, but it is power. In this case, that's what in his turn, that the real is the largest category, and it is made of powers. And the sequence of events to which powers give rise, be these experienced by a subject or not. So that is the second part, the sequence of event. That is the actuality in his term. So it's a sequence of events to which powers give rise, comes from the power, and that might be experience or might not. An experience of event in this regard is the third one. The actual contains events, experience or not, an experience of sequence of events. The empirical is the most limited category, consisting only of experience. So that's why I really like the concept, basically saying that empirical knowledge is just your experience of the actuality. Actuality is basically is the sequence of events which can come from powers. That's the point here. It's not as a sequence of events, period. No. The article is saying that if you stop there, that you cannot really explaining anything. You're describing something, but the description is not sufficient to really explain what you observe that. So that's why his argument is that no, there is powers. The question is that this guy end up, I will say, to simply claim, instead of accepting one infinite power or great power as the source of the reality or actuality, he end up to accept that every particles in the universe has such power. In other words, he ends up actually, accept that every single particle in the universe is like a god. So instead of accepting one God, now he kind of has to give this God's attributes and God's power to every single particle. I find this one more reasonable because at least it is a further step to understand that the material causality in a scientific method is really not helpful to understand the reality. So that's why I found it as an improvement, but I certainly think that is just in this case, it is funny to give the attribute of God to every single particle.
Well, the only way you can infer that anything has a power is to observe it. I mean, we have to start out with experience. One kind of experience is systematic, objective observation. This is what we do in science. and we look at objects, and we look at sequences. What are sequences? Basically, they're just interactions of objects. But how do you know what a property an object has without looking at it? You don't. You do the best you can, and you observe, and through regularities then you infer that some object has a property or a power. Take the electrons, very good example. What has happened is, over the course of the last couple hundred years, people have done experiments in which electrons' behavior has been observed, and from that they have inferred that electrons have certain kinds of properties. If you want to call them powers, I don't have a big problem with that. But what you've said about reality, actuality, and experience, I'm beginning to see what he means by that. I think I understand. The reality is the powers, actuality is the sequences, experience is what we observe. And I don't see how this helps your argument for the existence of God, really. I mean, he doesn't mention God anywhere in the article. He's just making a new framework for looking at metaphysics, you know, the way things exist and how to think about them. And I found myself agreeing partly with him, especially on his idea about laws. You know, laws are merely descriptions of regularities in nature. But where you and I disagree is, did these regularities have an origin through an intelligent designer? You say yes, I say no. I say you have no evidence to support your hypothesis. So that's about all I have to say about it.
Okay. I think, yeah, I think the paper is a step close to my idea. I'm not saying exactly it's really this is something that I embrace at 100%, but I think it's a step close to my idea, because it's simply accept that this apparent material causation cannot explain the reality, cannot be sufficient to understand the reality. And actually even make arguments say, no, what you see as a cause is not sufficient, and they are not necessary in certain circumstances as well. That's in order to be a law. So, and that's why I think the point is that now the common mistake that we do is like when you, as I mentioned, that when you actually try to understand that how TV works and how you get to a certain image on TV, and then you start to find a button on TV or find a remote control and actually a certain button on remote control and find a connection, and then actually see that this, you know, every time it works, you do experiment, you test it, it's actually, whenever you test it, you press the certain button, you see the image, you press another one, you turn it off. Then you start to say and come up with theory and say, you know what, the remote control is the cause of what you see on the screen. Now you are denying, in this case, a broadcasting center. You are denying the work of those, you know, thousand people. And I think perhaps some people, because of this type of education, people are not willing to really pay, you know, and have the TV station like PBS, because they somehow don't really believe that they have a serious contribution, maybe, even though they don't accept that one. My point is that, yes, there is connection between remote control and what you see on TV, and TV is, this is what it called as an established relationship. Whoever made the TV and made the remote control and established such relationship. Now, claiming that what you see on the TV is the outcome of what of pressing on, let's say, remote control, is a naive explanation, and it cannot really explain the reality at all. Is it helpful if you want to really use TV and watch something? Of course it's helpful, because it happened on a regular basis. But now, from that, just say that the reality is not helping. So that's why that article saying that what we see and how we explain the reality is no different than this example. Because you see hydrogen and oxygen always come together in a certain way, and you get water. Now, claiming that hydrogen, two hydrogen, and one oxygen can and is making water, or is sufficient to making water, and is the cause of the water alone, according to this article, is not a good argument. There must be something beyond that.
Well, we're probably getting close to the end of our recording capacity, so